Chag said, "Did you ever stop and wonder what it really means to carry the past? Not just as a story you read in a book, but like a weight, heavy on your chest, on your soul?" For Elijah, that weight wasn't some distant memory. It was alive, breathing in his bones every day. This is a story that begins long before him, before the houses, the streets, the cars. It starts in a time when his ancestors were chained, stolen from their homes, and sold like property. It's a story written in pain, but lived with a quiet, stubborn strength. I'm Mark Joie, and this is Injustice Browin. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts below. Because Elijah's story isn't just his, it's part of all of us who felt the sting of history's cruel hand. And believe me, it's a story that demands to be heard. Elijah grew up in a small town deep in the South, the kind of place where the echoes of the past never stop chasing you. His grandmother, Mary, was born on a sharecropper's farm, the daughter of a woman who once worked fields under the sun, picking cotton until her fingers bled. Mary told Elijah about those days not with bitterness, but with a heavy kind of pride. She carried the memories of chains and backbreaking work, but also the fierce will to survive. Her stories were like shadows, long and dark, stretching across time. They weren't just about slavery. They were about what came after the Jim Crow laws that carved invisible lines across towns and hearts. Lines that said where Elijah's family could live, learn, and work. Lines that said who they were allowed to love or trust. Elijah's father was born right in the middle of that harsh world. A man who learned early that justice was a word spoken by others, never lived by his own people. He faced the daily humiliations, being followed in stores, denied service, or stopped by police for no reason at all. But what haunted him most wasn't just those moments. It was the fear that these chains would never fully break, that the future Elijah might live in would still be marked by the same old lies and limits. And so Elijah grew up carrying the world's one, filled with stories of pain and injustice, and the other, a hope so quiet it almost felt like a secret. At school, he saw the broken promises of integration, the way black children were still taught to be smaller, quieter, less than. At church, he heard hymns that spoke of freedom, but he knew freedom was still waiting just out of reach. He remembered the nights when his father sat him down and spoke of resilience not as a grand idea, but as a daily fight. "Son," he'd say, "you've got to hold on to yourself. They might try to take everything else, but don't let them steal your spirit." Those words sank deep, like roots growing underground. But that spirit wasn't always easy to protect. Elijah's family faced threats, violence, and loss. Neighbors who once smiled turned cold when the color of their skin was too much to bear. Schools and businesses closed doors. Police cars rolled by with lights flashing, a reminder that fear was never far. Even so, Elijah saw something powerful in those around him, the way his grandmother's hands kept working the soil, even when the crops failed. The way his father stood tall, despite the world trying to push him down. It was a strength born not from hope alone, but from necessity, from knowing that survival was the first kind of resistance. And that's what Elijah learned. The history in his blood wasn't just a chain, it was also a link, a connection to those who had fought and held on before him. Every scar, every story, was a mark of endurance. Not perfect, not easy, but real. This wasn't a story of heroes with capes. It was a story of ordinary people, caught in extraordinary cruelty, who found ways to keep going, even when the world told them to give up, even when their voices were silenced. Elijah's story is a reminder that the past is never really past. It lives in the lines on a face, the weight of a name, the quiet strength that keeps a family moving forward. And it's a call to never forget that what came before shapes what can still be changed. So, as we start this journey with Elijah, remember this story belongs to all of us. It's about the cost of injustice, the scars it leaves, and the courage it takes to stand in spite of it. And trust me, this is only the beginning. What part of Elijah's family story strikes you most? Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. And if you're ready to walk deeper into this story, make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next will test everything Elijah thought he knew about justice and hope. Chag said Elijah left the South behind, hoping the city would be different. He thought maybe, just maybe, the pain of his family's past would loosen its grip. But the city wasn't a refuge, it was a new battlefield. The streets were no kinder, just less visible. The chains took on different shapes, but they still wrapped tight. The first time the police stopped him without reason, Elijah felt a familiar cold rage ignite inside. He was walking home from work, his head held high, hands empty. No drugs, no weapons, nothing but the color of his skin. The flashing lights cut through the night. A sudden, sharp interruption. License and registration. They barked. No explanation, no apology, just suspicion. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Each stop chipped away at his patience, grinding down his sense of safety. How many times could a man be treated like a threat just for being who he was? The question burned inside him, unanswered, raw. Jobs were supposed to be his way out, a chance to build, to prove. But even there, the fight was constant. Interviews where his qualifications were dismissed, replaced by empty promises. Doors that opened for others stayed shut for him. We'll call you, they said. But the calls never came. It wasn't about skills or talent. It was about the color of his skin, a label stamped invisible, but heavy. Elijah learned the hard way how the system whispered less than every day, in ways small enough to be overlooked, but sharp enough to sting. At the grocery store, a cashier's eyes would linger on him longer than polite. At the apartment complex, a manager hesitated before returning his application. In meetings, his ideas were ignored until repeated by someone else. These weren't loud acts of hate. They were quiet, persistent reminders that he didn't quite belong. Some days, the anger inside him felt like a fire ready to burst. He wanted to scream, to break something, to be seen not as a problem, but as a person. But the world wasn't built for his rage. It demanded silence or risk more pain. Elijah's friends tried to tell him to hold back, to be careful, keep your head down. They said, don't give them a reason. But how do you hide when every glance, every gesture feels like a judgment? How do you keep walking forward when the road itself seems designed to trip you? He thought about his father's words, hold on to your spirit, but some days, that felt impossible. The weight of being misunderstood, feared, and dismissed was crushing. The system hadn't changed. It just wore a different face, and yet Elijah refused to break. The rage simmered beneath the surface, not destructive but alive. It sharpened his mind, fueled his resolve. He saw the cracks in the system and vowed to fight them, one step at a time. This wasn't just his fight. It was the fight of every person who had ever been told they were less than. Elijah carried their stories with him, the silenced, the ignored, the beaten down. Their pain was his pain, their frustration, his fuel. The city pulsed around him, loud, busy, indifferent, but Elijah's voice inside stayed steady. I am here. I matter. That small truth was a lifeline, a spark in the dark. It was the quiet rebellion against a world that tried to erase him, and that rebellion was just beginning. Tell me, have you ever felt that simmering anger beneath the surface? What keeps you going when the world won't see your worth? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to Injustice Browning. Elijah's journey is far from over. There are moments in life when everything you believe in shatters in an instant. For Elijah, that moment came on a quiet evening, one that started like any other, but ended with a scream that echoed through his soul. His friend Marcus was walking home, unarmed, just like Elijah had done so many times before. But that night, the streets were different. The police car pulled up, and what happened next wasn't just an act of violence, it was a violent declaration that some lives don't matter. Elijah saw it all, the sudden shove, the harsh words, the weight of bodies pressing down. Marcus didn't resist, couldn't resist, but the officers didn't care. They used force without reason, their hands and batons becoming instruments of fear and pain. Elijah's heart stopped, his breath caught, as he screamed for them to stop, but his voice was swallowed by sirens and cold steel. When it was over, Marcus lay broken, bloodied, and silent on the pavement. Elijah felt like the ground beneath him gave way. The shock wasn't just about the brutality, it was about the realization that this could happen to anyone, to those he loved most. The man who had shared laughter, struggles, and dreams with him was now a victim of a system designed to protect others, but not him. The days that followed were worse. Marcus was arrested, charged with resisting arrest, a cruel twist of the knife. The police reports twisted the truth, painting Marcus as the aggressor. Elijah watched the news, hoping for justice. But all he saw were dismissive headlines and the cold indifference of a system that turned its back on its own citizens. Elijah felt betrayed not just by the officers, but by a justice system that promised fairness but delivered cruelty. The courtroom became a battlefield of lies and loopholes, where truth was ignored and power ruled. Lawyers spoke in legal jargon, but Elijah heard only one word: no justice. In that crushing silence, Elijah's hope began to crumble. He questioned everything: his faith in people, his belief in change, even his own humanity. How could a world claim to be just when it allowed this to happen? How do you hold on to hope when the very system built to protect you becomes the source of your pain? Nights became heavy with tears Elijah didn't know he could shed. The grief settled deep inside him, a wound that refused to heal. He felt hollow, lost in a storm of despair, but beneath the sadness was a raw, aching truth: the fight for justice was far from over, and maybe it never would be. In his quiet moments, Elijah wondered if he was alone, if anyone else felt the same heartbreak, if anyone else knew what it meant to stand by a friend whose life was stolen by injustice. That question lingered, heavy and unanswerable. This was the darkest hour, the point where dreams seemed to die and the future blurred into a painful uncertainty. But even in the depths of despair, a flicker remained fragile but real. It was the ember of a truth Elijah held onto, that the world might fail, but his spirit could still rise. So here Elijah stands, wounded but unbroken, hurt but still breathing. The battle had taken a devastating toll, but it hadn't won. Not yet. What would you do if the people sworn to protect you became your greatest threat? Have you ever faced a moment that shook your faith in everything? Share your thoughts below. And if you're feeling this story, subscribe to Injustice Browning. Elijah's fight is about to take a turn, one that will test the limits of pain and hope. As Chagpchas said, there's a moment after the darkest night, when the first light breaks through, the kind of light that doesn't erase the shadows, but shows you where to step next. For Elijah, that moment came when he realized he wasn't alone, when the weight of his pain found others carrying it too, and suddenly the burden didn't feel quite so crushing. He found them in small gatherings, in quiet conversations, in the determined eyes of people who refused to let history repeat itself, activists who had walked this road before, who carried stories of resistance often forgotten or ignored. They spoke of heroes who stood tall against impossible odds, people who didn't just survive, but fought back with courage and conviction. Elijah listened, learned, and slowly something inside him shifted. Resilience wasn't just about holding on, it was about pushing forward, about turning pain into power, about standing up and saying, no more. The streets, once a place of fear, became a place of purpose. He joined protests where voices rose together, demanding justice not just for Marcus, but for every person who'd ever been silenced. The chants weren't just noise, they were a call to action, a promise that the fight wasn't over. Organizing meetings, planning legal battles, sharing stories, each small victory became a brick in a foundation of change. It wasn't easy. The system was still heavy, still resistant. But Elijah saw that change wasn't a single moment. It was a movement, built by people who refused to back down. In those moments, Elijah's rage transformed. It became fuel, sharp and steady, driving him forward without losing his dignity. He spoke at rallies with a voice steady and strong, telling the truth that some wanted to ignore. He worked with lawyers who fought not just in courtrooms, but in the hearts of communities. The community around him grew stronger too. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now stood shoulder to shoulder. Parents, students, elders, all united by a shared dream of justice and respect. Elijah saw in their faces the same fierce hope his grandmother once carried, the same stubborn pride his father had fought to protect. This was more than resistance, it was reclamation, taking back what had been stolen by injustice, rebuilding from the broken pieces. And it was raw, it was gritty, but it was real. Elijah knew the road ahead was long, full of battles not yet won, but for the first time, he felt ready to fight not just for himself, but for every voice drowned out by hate and fear, ready to stand tall and say, we will be seen, we will be heard, we will not be broken. And as the light grew stronger, Elijah's story became part of a larger story, one of resilience, courage, and relentless hope. What gives you hope when everything feels lost? How do you find strength in the face of despair? Share your story below, and don't forget to subscribe to Injustice Browning. Elijah's journey is far from over, but this spark of resistance is just the beginning. Chag said, justice is never swift. It moves like a slow river, carving through stone, steady, relentless, but often unseen. For Elijah, the journey toward justice was long, filled with obstacles that tested every ounce of his strength. But with every step forward, the pieces began to shift. The community refused to stay silent. Together, they gathered evidence, shared stories, and demanded accountability. Elijah worked alongside lawyers and activists, their voices joining in a chorus too loud to ignore. The police department's corruption, once hidden behind closed doors, began to unravel. Officers who once operated with impunity faced scrutiny. The faces of those responsible for Marcus's death were exposed. Their actions laid bare for all to see. Rest followed. A clear message that abuse of power would no longer be tolerated. But the road to reform was still winding and uncertain. Changes in policies, increased oversight, and community programs started to take root, small but significant steps toward a future where justice might finally be more than a word. Elijah found himself standing at the center of this movement, not by choice, but by necessity. His story, once filled with pain and loss, became a beacon for others fighting their own battles. He spoke at town halls and rallies, his voice steady and filled with the weight of experience. He honored Marcus not just as a victim, but as a brother, a friend, a life cut short by injustice. There were moments when the victory felt incomplete, when the scars of the past clung tight, reminding him that justice is never perfect, never complete. But Elijah understood something deeper now. Justice was not just about punishment, it was about healing, learning, and creating space for something better. In reflection, Elijah saw how far he had come from a young man burdened by grief and raised to a leader forged by struggle and hope. He carried the legacy of his ancestors. Their endurance echoed in his fight. The story that began with pain now held a new meaning, a story of resilience, redemption, and the power to change the course of history. He knew the fight was far from over. There would always be new battles, fresh wounds, and moments of doubt. But Elijah also knew this dignity could not be stolen, strength could not be broken, and hope, even in its smallest form, could light the darkest nights. This is Elijah's story and the story of many who stand against injustice every day. A reminder that even when the world tries to bury us, we rise, we resist, we endure. What does justice mean to you? How do you find hope in the fight for change? Share your thoughts below, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to Injustice Brown. Elijah's journey teaches us all, no matter how long the road, justice can come, and when it does, it changes everything.